Good morning, everybody. Happy Sunday to you. Happy coffee break. I'm Spencer Campbell, aka Gila RPGs. Every Sunday, I sit down with my friends and awesome people from the indie RPG scene and just share a cup of coffee and talk about whatever it is that we're excited about, we're working on, anything like that. I'm extremely excited about today because I've got my good friend Adam Vass here. Adam is one of my favorites. You can probably see in the video my pile of Adam Vass games that I've got here, just that I'm ready to gush about. But before I go into all my gushing, Adam, why don't you go ahead and introduce yourself to the fine folks at home and like throw out all your links and everything at the beginning too, just to get that, and then we'll do it again at the end too. Hold on, Adam. They cannot hear you, it turns out. I can hear you. Hold on, folks. Try something again, Adam. Hold on, folks. I did a brand new audio setup between times that I've done this, and so that would explain a lot why this isn't working. Now try saying something, Adam.
All right, we're going again. We're doing it again.
I think that works. I
Cool.
think I think it's working. Well, wait. There we
Huh?
go. We got people in chat. All right, we did it. We
Okay.
nailed it.
Okay. I'm Adam Vass. I make tabletop role-playing games as World Champ Game Co. You can find all my games at worldchamp.io and worldchampgameco.itch.io for the downloads. I put out games almost every month on Patreon at patreon.com/worldchampgameco. And I'm currently kickstarting a game called Soul Burner at www.dying.day.
Such a
And I'm on
powerful
Twitter
link.
at WC Gameco. I think that's everything.
That's very good. That's very good. Dying.day is such a good link. I was listening to the
When
Brain Trust podcast the other day, and you were talking about how, like, you and Will were talking about how it's a very good link. Like,
yeah, I when I did Cyber Metal and I bought Pentagram.city, I was like, oh, I should just do this for every game because it's like one, like on Instagram you can't click links or you can't you just are like relying on people to remember, and like no one will ever remember a tiny URL or a bit.ly or anything like that.
right.
So just making it something that's part of the game, I think actually might work. Like I don't have data for this, but it seems like it would. You're gonna remember your dying day, and like you won't remember tinyurl.com/soulburner.
It was
So
so easy for me to like pull up the cyber metal link anytime I needed it because I was like,
yeah,
I have this link so burned into my brain. It just makes sense.
yeah,
It's very good. Very good.
they're
Um,
cheap now too. It's like $1 a month to keep that.
that's not
So
bad.
when the campaign's over, Pentagram City will just go to like the Cyber Metal page on my website or something. And the intent was like if I was going to continue to make Death Agent games, that I could always use Pentagram City to forward to whatever the newest game is. It's like a
Right.
hub. Um, but that project might be dead in the water, unfortunately.
Well, we always have the biggest, highest ambitions when we're putting together
Yeah.
our domains, and then I was just looking at domains the other day too, where I was like, I should probably just pick up some for games, and then I know that if I buy them, I have to like actually work on the game, or at least that's what I think. But then I won't. Then I'll be like, well, now I just have this
Yeah, that
link.
was me buying running shoes and spending $100 on running shoes to tell myself I'm going to work out.
Nice. Very good. Very good. Um, I mean, I'm super excited to talk just because, I mean, as you can see from the pile, huge fan. Love everything that Adam does. The Patreon is super cool. I want to talk about that. I want to talk about obviously Soul Burner for sure. I want to talk about Cyber Metal since that's in sort of like the post Kickstarter phase of production. You got a lot of plates that
Yeah,
you're spinning right now.
more than normal even. And I feel like I'm always doing a lot, but right now is definitely like the most.
It's I mean, I've always been blown away with your ability to just produce, to just keep making, because like with the Patreon, it's a once a month thing, and it's like a whole ass cool thing, like whole new concept of layout and art, and like every game feels very different and new, but also feels very Adam Vass. I have plans of doing a couple of my RPG and 5 minute videos of your stuff just in like bundles of like, here's Adam's games about art, because I just want to talk about how Adam thinks about art, and I think it's really cool.
Yeah. Yeah, the Patreon's like a good excuse for me to get those things out. It's almost like, you know, Twitter is to a thought what an essay is to like a complete thought.
Mm,
My Patreon releases are these kind of like thought chunks, and then my tentpole releases, my hardcover books and stuff, are like much deeper dives into similar themes.
yeah. Yeah, it's super super cool. I'm curious because I don't think I've talked to you about this. Like with the Patreon, how far ahead do you usually have things? Like do you, because it's a monthly release essentially for
Yeah.
you. So like are you just like, all right, it's April, so I'm making May's game, or is it like you've got a
No.
couple brewing?
Um, it's May, so I'm making May's game is usually how it goes. And a lot of them uh happen over a weekend. Like I can think of, No Game and Veneration, the Saint Anger Metallica zine. Um, they're ideas that were kind of steeping, and then on my day off, air quotes, um, I would just knock them out and send it to print on Monday. And
Oh,
then the only time that I'm ever really thinking ahead for Patreon is if I have an idea backup where like I have too many things and I need to kick one out, or if printing is a hurdle. Like this month's game, Roll for Clues, which is on a scratch off card.
yeah.
Um, Scratchers just take longer to print than zines do. So I had that sent to print last month, and so it was ready to go. Like it was, I don't really sit on them because I'm not a patient person. So once something's done, especially once it's been printed, I can't help but just to get it out. And so very often my Patreon releases are spur of the moment. I feel excited about something in the moment, so I chase that feeling, for better or worse.
Right.
Because sometimes I think I'm blinded by that, and I don't necessarily do the critical design that would go into like a bigger project.
Mm,
Um, but I think there's something very pure about that, and it's almost like game jam energy that I'm just having by myself. Of this idea is really cool. I'm just gonna finish it to some state that I consider finished, and probably never look at it again.
yeah. I think that's like the perfect mentality for the Patreon games, right? It's just like this is almost like not like proof of concept, but it's like I've got this like itch in my head. I gotta scratch it, and I could spend all day trying to diagnose the itch and figure out what it is and create this big elaborate thing, or I could just scratch the itch and be like, all right, I'm ready for the next time my brain gets
Yeah.
itchy.
Yeah, exactly. And a lot of that too comes from like the visual aspect of it. Um, I do most of my own art for my own games, and sometimes I'm chasing an aesthetic. Like even Ether Operations was aesthetic first and form function, which was that like fold out crazy zine format.
God,
The
it is so
mechanics came
cool.
after.
Mechanics came after for Ether operations. It was just
Yeah,
like you
I
had
wanted
like,
to Yeah, I was inspired by all this weird kind of like new agey art that was showing up on my Instagram, and um wanted to make that and wanted to gamify that in some way.
mm,
And so the mechanics came after because I really just wanted to nail the look and the feel of like your it followed Necronautilus in this idea of like your characters that you almost can't describe.
yeah.
Like
Right.
you're just a pure being of brain,
Right.
and like what the fuck is that? And I like that. That's what all of my recent stuff is. It's just that really exciting gonzo
Mm,
full tilt weirdness, because there's enough games where I can be an elf that I don't feel like I have anything innovative or interesting to say there.
You're not about to go blow everybody's minds on a new interpretation of Elf right now?
Soulburner is a little bit of this, is like me trying to do something fantasy,
Mm.
but it is still very me and weird, and like
It's
it's gonna
so
be
you
something
and
else.
weird. I remember listening to you talk to Will about this. You're like, I think this is my first attempt at fantasy. I was like, yeah, I guess, but it's Adam Vass fantasy, which is a totally
Yeah.
different flavor of fantasy. uh,
Yeah, yeah.
which is sweet. I want to talk about Soul Burning, but actually, you just reminded me something that I've actually been wanting to ask you for a while, which is you mentioned like with like ether operations that it was like you had like the idea of like the aesthetics first, like aesthetics came first and then mechanics. Your games are so wildly like they drip with aesthetic, right? Like that's a big part of your design style. Every time I see a
Yeah.
game, I know it's an Adam Bass game. So my question is for you, is it usually like you have the sense of like what mechanically you're interested in exploring first and you find the aesthetics and like flavor that goes with it, or is it vice versa, or do they just kind of like manifest at the same time for you where you're like, ah, I know what this all is?
They're definitely tied together. It's not usually a sequential thought. Um, but I would say the thing that comes first, like often the very impetus of it is you ever I'm sure you have because of your psychology
Background.
knowledge. Yes. But the idea that like some people when they think they can like, whatever, like 25% of people have a narrator, or
Right.
only some people have the ability to like see an image. If you say apple, I can picture that. I can like have every sensory experience of that apple in my mind. And I know I only just learned like a year ago that that's not universal.
Yeah, it's
And it
bizarre. Like you kind of
it
just
messed me
assume
up.
that everybody thinks and sees things the same way you do, and you realize that is so
Yeah.
not the case.
So so I daydream a lot. I kind of like part of it too comes from having some sort of I got diagnosed with OCD, and I think it's a blessing and a curse in
Mm.
that when the thing that I'm obsessing over is cool, I can chase that and turn a snowball into a boulder, like so a lot of these games, especially Cyber Metal and Necronautilus and uh these tentpole games come from this visualization I have of a scene or a character or um almost just like a frame of a movie
Mm.
that doesn't exist. And I go, okay, well, then I'm going to make the movie or I'm going to make the game of that movie.
Hell
And
yeah.
that's what you end up getting to read and play. So, like, Pentagram City is this image I have of like modded out demons click wheeling their iPods to try to find a song that they can't find. And like the room is filled with purple weed smoke. And it's just like it's interesting because the game itself is violent and action based, but the impetus of it was just like it's very much just like chilling with your friends, but you get to be extreme.
Yeah.
Um, and kind of tapping into that like 90s extreme aesthetic mixed with 90s technology silliness. Like, um, you know, I think I'm a little bit older than you and a lot of the people in our community. I just turned 34,
We're
but
the
I
same
remember,
age.
oh, righteous. uh, the as a tangent, I get really self-conscious when somebody's like 23 and they just made the best game of the year, and I'm like,
Right.
whoa, I thought I was killing it, but I'm late. Um, so shoot, I lost the train of thought on that tangent, and I
You
kind of
are
thought
older
I
than
might.
other people, is what you were saying.
Oh, I just remember having the printer that you had to tear the sides off of, like the
Mm-hmm.
spools or
Dot
whatever.
matrix sort of thing.
And I just kind of wanted to like so much of cyberpunk is this idealized everything technological is perfect future. And like I remember living through the Y2K scare and like getting AOL discs in the mail and all these silly things. Tech has never been even good. Like tech always kind of feels like it's a step behind what the idea is.
Mm,
And so I was really interested in cyberpunk as this technological future, retro future that like doesn't quite work good.
yeah. It
Uh,
it's so
because that's
good.
comedy. That's hilarious. And the idea that it's still a cyberpunk game where you're still doing missions and taking down like these power hungry people and all this stuff, but like your computer froze. Like that's hilarious. So um I wanted to capture the comedy of that in a totally gonzo. I think the other thing, and I realized this recently, is a lot of my games feel very Adult Swim, of like
Mm,
just turning the volume up so the dial breaks off and just I like that. It's fun. It doesn't have to be funny. I don't think a lot of my games are intended to be comedy, but there's an innate comedy to role playing,
right.
and being an adult that's rolling dice and telling stories is kind of funny. So like um it's certainly not a bad thing, but I like to be honest in some way about the sort of absurdity of it. And I think I bring that into the game itself.
Yeah, I mean, it's so much to me. It's more exciting to engage with a cyberpunk future of technology that I have experienced and like know how. I remember thinking how cool it was, like my mind being blown by new things. Like when we got AOL installed in our house and being like,
Yeah.
wait a minute, what? How does this work? And then like, and exactly like you said, it never really worked the way you wanted it to. Someone would pick up the phone and you'd get disconnected from the internet, and it's just like, okay, yeah, don't worry, it is cool. I promise you, it's cool. But you're gonna run into all these horrible things that just keep happening. I love that vibe getting captured as the cyberpunk, kind of the retro future instead of the, because I can't imagine like what technology is actually going to look like in 20 years. It's going to be
Yeah.
fucking nothing like whatever anybody has ever pictured before. So like whatever we come up with is going to be just kind of like like a slightly advanced version of what we have now. So I'd rather like dick around with the stuff that we had before and be like, yeah, remember
Yeah.
when that was the bleeding edge? It was
There's so
wild.
many fun movies from like 90s and early 2000s too, where they're like, we have to go into the internet. And like, that's also specifically something I was trying to capture, of just like this almost fundamental understanding of what technology is for and what it can do. Mixed with like, like Nintendo 64 graphics.
Right, exactly. God, I mean, the number of times that we were kids and looking at something like a PS2 game and be like, it will
Yeah.
never get better. It will simply never get better.
More real than real life.
uh, see, that shit's fun. Like, that's fun to think back about that and build up an entire game where that's the premise. That's where we got to.
Yeah.
But then also, like exactly like you said, there's a demon with their iPod scrolling through the click wheel, and you're like, okay, cool, giant, massive, sentient rats over there. We got a bug man over there, demon. I'd hang out in Pentagram City. It's pretty
Yeah.
cool.
Yeah, it very much captures, in addition to that sort of like 90s youth, um just sort of like the feeling of me being 22,
Mm,
and like when I was touring for 9 months out of 12 months of the year and staying in people's kitchen floors, and like you have I don't know, conflict, you have
mm,
drama and stuff, but it's not on a global scale. I'm not saving the world. I'm just trying to get by, and like my friends and I are doing what we can together. And that really is the core experience of cyber metal, is the world kind of sucks, and the world's always going to suck and has sucked, because you are not ever going to be able to change it. It's never going to be your thing.
mm,
We're not going to level 20 and becoming the rulers of this land, like we're always just going to be the player, the characters in the game are called citizens. And I think that was a deliberate choice too, to just be like, the city is bigger than you are. You're always going to just be at best a component part of a moving machine.
yeah.
And there's a futility in that, but there's also the sort of like Sisyphean, you have to find what you want out of that experience.
Right, exactly. That rocks. That rocks so much. I'm so excited for Cyber Metal.
Me too.
I mean, before we do talk about Soul Burner, like, so Cyber Metal's in, like, the Kickstarter's done.
Yeah,
You're in. I think you're in layout mode with it right now, right?
it was on Game Found,
Yeah.
uh, which but it was not a good time, and I don't like it there. And I've been really cautious because I still am using their pledge manager, and I still rely on that for money.
Mm,
Um, but I will suffice to say it is not gonna be the next thing for our community or our
mm.
world. But it is in layout. Uh, I I had Will Yobst edit it, who did an amazing job, and it's just like so invigorating to get that edit back.
God, Will is the
Um,
best editor in the game.
it was awesome because they leave comments and stuff in such a way that it feels like you're having a not real time conversation with someone who cares about the thing that you're making as much as you did,
Hmm.
and uh, it's just really fascinating. And I think in addition to the sort of grammar fixes and stuff, um, the game is just made better by someone asking me questions I wasn't asking myself. But so that is happening. I'm still tinkering with the doc and kind of like almost racing myself of finishing this section and then putting it into layout and
Mm,
doing art for it. Luckily, I've been doing art for it for months. That was part of the blessing and curse that was running a crowdfund before the game was done.
yeah.
Is that I had to make a ton of art, and now I'm in that way well prepared to do layout because there's so many assets I can use. It looks really cool. I'm really happy with it. Um, I'm doing that sort of maximalist layout thing again, but with way more art than I've ever had before.
Mm,
Um, Even like Necronautilus, which I think is a very art heavy book, this has more. Almost
hell
every
yeah.
page has like something so far. So
Hell yeah.
it's
I
gonna
can't
look
wait.
really rich and cool. And again, I want to imbue those ideals through the visuals because text can get you so far, but it relies on you to read all the text. But if you just open the book and you see, somebody prying a skull open to extract the data, like you get something else out of that, and it's
Totally.
cool and rich. So I'm really happy with it. I'm doing all this weird analog stuff too, of like almost all the illustrations are drawn with real ink and scanned in. I've been using my thermal printer, the printer that we use to make shipping labels.
Yeah.
Um, to get like really real texture. Like I'm holding this up
Oh,
really close,
cool.
but because thermal labels are like really poor quality,
Uh-huh.
right? Innately. So you get these weird like streaks and dots and stuff because that printer doesn't know what gray is. It
Right.
just does things. So um, you know, making it in the computer, printing it on the thermal printer, sticking that to a piece of paper, and then scanning it back in to use that file. Um, there's so much really cool experimentation I'm getting to do with. Again, it's funny. I think about this often, and I think about this especially when I make something like Fiskborg or that's looking
Mm,
like with the punk aesthetic, is kind of in contrast to what we were talking about earlier. Technology has surpassed the ability to be too shitty,
mm.
and there's not anything I can do that's like going to Kinko's and copy scamming when I was in high school and making zines with a copier because printers now are just better. So
Mm.
I'm using Photoshop to emulate this outdated technology to look worse, but on some level it's hard to capture that bad look because Photoshop is too advanced. It's using AI to fix everything.
Right.
Um, so I'm ending up in these fun little cycles of like making something look bad enough to be evocative, but good enough to still be legible and like functional in a modern graphic design kind of way.
Yeah.
Uh, it's fun. It's weird. It's like a cool challenge to me, and I get to, you know, I bought graffiti pens for the first time in like 15 years, and I'm doing like drippy text stuff. Uh,
Hell yeah.
I behind me I have just a bunch of like smeared paint on
Oh
that I did with
yeah.
palette knives to scan in and mess with, and it's just like awakening some aspect of the visual artist in me that even uh, like I said, I do all the art for my games, but this one feels really unique, and it's pushing me in new directions that I didn't predict.
That rocks. So I mean, if people like missed Cyber Metal, is the Y2K demo still? It's still up on like itch, right? So
Yeah,
people can see
so
what
it's
this is all about.
yeah, Y2K is still free on itch, and I do have the zine at my web store, worldchamps.io, and it is like a 12-page preview
Mm.
effectively of both the mechanics and the aesthetic of cyber metal. Um,
It's like
and
a
then the cyber
prequel,
metal,
right? Like that's kind of how
yeah,
you were pitching
so it
it.
takes place in the same place 12 years prior. And there is a little bit of like some of the events and locations and stuff from Y2K do end up in Pentagram City in Cyber Metal 2012. Um, but 12 years removed. So they're changed, they're
Yeah.
different. They don't necessarily take into account what you would do as a player
Yeah.
because they couldn't. I could never do that. But they kind of still are considerate that like Y2K is a game that you could have experienced,
Mm-hmm.
but you may not have. So it tries to account for the idea that you might have no base knowledge here, but you also might have spent a couple hours here.
Yeah.
And uh either way, again, the world keeps spinning. You're not you might make small changes,
Mm-hmm.
but um you can't like fully eradicate this region or anything like that. You don't have that power.
Yeah.
So um yeah, Y2K is up, and then Cyber Metal you can still pre-order it at pentagram.city. And that'll probably stay open for the rest of the month until I send it to print and do all the other, and there's like so much merch involved too, which I love doing, but I'm also at the point of like, damn, I might have overdone it on this one.
I mean, it is cool to get all like the shirts and like all the other baubles and trinkets for games. Like it is very rad and cool because especially your stuff looks awesome. So it's like, yeah, of course I want a bunch of stuff that looks and
Yeah,
evokes this thing, and so I can slap it all over my stuff.
getting the metal pin that is the character's like
Like the
interface
dock,
jack that
yeah.
goes on the back of their skull. I got those from the manufacturer, and they're very cool, but they're just in a bag in my inventory closet because the game's not going to ship for a couple more months. So
Right.
it's paining me to keep them in hiding.
Yeah, it's hard. I mean, you mentioned it earlier, and I am the same way. I am not a patient person, so like when I
Oh,
have something and it's ready to be shown to people, like I'm ready to just show it and release it at the worst timing and with no fanfare, no preparation. I'm just like, ah, it's out now, and yeah, I got to learn to be patient with
it's
some of
hard.
those things. It's very hard. Um, okay, so that's cyber metal, which rocks. That's the cyberpunk retro future. Let's go into fantasy
Yeah.
now with Adam's Soul Burner, which I am so excited about. I feel like I didn't know you were working on this until you kind of just like announced it, and then like it was just I saw the image, like the classic Soul Burner banner, and I was like, holy shit, what is
Yeah.
this? It rocks. Um, so what's the quick pitch for Soul Burner?
Yeah. In Soul Burner, you play the ashen corpse of someone who was burned to death, and death didn't take. So you come back to life as this body of embers that can warp and change as you experience the afterlife. Um, and whether you use that afterlife to seek revenge on those who burned you or like learn about who your true self is or whatever is up to you. And it's compatible with, but it is a standalone game inspired by Morkborg, the Swedish classic modern all star. Um, so it uses, D20 plus X to overcome your challenges and stuff. Um, so I'm hoping it will be familiar enough and adjacent enough to that sort of fantasy role playing experience that people expect, but bringing in um I was gonna say a more sentimental. It's really hard to call a game about being a burnt corpse sentimental, but the idea that your body is physically made of your memories,
Mm-hmm.
which might be a weapon. It might your head could be a sword,
Mm-hmm.
um, or it could be a person or a moment or whatever that makes up your limbs and your body. So it's like this weird Cronenberg body horror mess that is your character. Because again, I want you to be the most insane thing you cannot be in other games. Um, but it brings that memory and sort of subjectivity of memory from Necronautilus into the dark fantasy of Morkborg. So it's yeah. If you put Cronenberg and Morkborg and Necronautilus in a blender, Soulburner is what comes out.
That's a great pitch. That's a really solid line right there. I I have to say, when I first read Necronautilus, when you were talking about it a long time ago, and like I was lucky enough to be in some of like the play tests. I the one of the things the reason Necronautilus is such a special game to me is it scratches two of the primary itches that I have as a
Yeah,
cognitive psychologist. I study language and I study memory. Like those are two big areas that I study. Um, and so when you were making these games about the interpretation of language, and that's specifically the area that I study what's called text and discourse processing. So like the conversation you have with text essentially and how you interpret it and like non-literal language. And then the infallibility of memory. I was like, holy shit, this game is exactly right up my alley. It's so perfect. And you do such a phenomenal job of capturing those ideas, especially the idea of memory being this incredibly imperfect thing, yet it is the thing that builds us. Like we are made of our memories. Even like you described it so perfectly right there. A body that is literally composed of your memories, like that's it. That's us. We
yeah,
are truly just a big blob full of memories up there, and that's how we go. So
right.
I'm so into it.
Yeah, this on some level too. This comes from like Ship of Theseus. Like you shed all of your dead skin, however, like once every 7 years. Are you the same person?
Right.
And like you said, like your memory or your experience is the thing that makes you you. And in Soulburner, that's literally the only thing that makes you you because your body was burnt and there's nothing left of it. So, um, and while you're in this exploration, in this fantasy, um, you're accruing new memories. So
Hmm.
you're constantly changing. The other like cool tagline I have for the game is like every dice roll changes who you are
Yeah.
because you either incur additional memories and you like explore again that past experience that makes you your present, but on your quest you're creating new memories and those continue to shape you even though in the narrative you're dead or you are it's hard to tackle, you're undead.
Right.
You tried to die, I don't know, it's like uh not important, that's the hand
We
wave.
don't need to categorize it.
Yeah. So, if you take down an ogre, you could have that ogre's anger, like their
Mm-hmm.
kind of malice at like that's your leg now. Like
Mm-hmm.
you and what that means, how you manifest it physically and how you use it to overcome your future challenges is the subjectivity, is like what does that experience mean to you? Because as role players, that might not be an encounter that you care about or you take with you, especially again in fantasy, like thinking of playing the D&D like starter kit and doing
Mm-hmm.
Lost Mines of like for some reason I really remember one of the first encounters is just like going down the street and seeing a dead horse cart,
Right.
and spoiler alert, it's a goblin sabotage, like they're in the bushes, and if you investigate the horse or whatever they shoot arrows at you. And I remember it probably because it was, to me, Adam, not my character. It was one of my first role playing experiences, but it's kind of a throwaway,
Yeah.
right? Like it's an introduction to get you involved in the story. in Soul Burner, there's no such thing as a throwaway because every time you interact with it, someone takes something with them,
Mm-hmm.
figuratively. And I think that's awesome because it takes that sort of act structure that we take from media and put into our games of like, if you're going to fight the Lich, then everything between you and the Lich kind of doesn't matter because
Mm-hmm.
you have a goal. It does matter in Soul Burner. And
Right.
those experiences change you, even if you think they are insignificant. Um, and on some level, on a, like the psychological level there, I think that's true of our lived experience. You don't really know what is going to be important until you have that hindsight and that context. And, you can think back to like being in the talent show in fifth grade and thinking of how that shaped you more than you probably thought when you were
Mm-hmm.
in fifth grade. And so that's something that I want Soulburner to be is this awareness or like openness to every experience becoming significant. And by putting that into the mechanics, by having it be your body is composed of these moments,
Mm-hmm.
and some of them overwrite others, and some, like in Necronautilus, like if you crit, you the thing changes.
Yeah.
Uh, so in Necronautilus, if you get exactly the value, you do this like letter play Scrabble thing where you rearrange the letters into new words. Um, in Soulburner, the thing like that limb explodes. It's like this fiery energy that just pops, and so you get this intense, like critical result, but where it regrows is like based on that moment that you just created.
Right.
Because rolling a crit in a role playing game is a significant moment. It's the sort of like meta play of like you as a player get this intense thrill of rolling a 20 or whatever, and then you as a character have an intense thrill of part of your body exploding.
Right. I mean, the memory stuff is just so cool to me because, like, exactly like you said, you never really know what memories are gonna stick with you that are going to be those like formative things. Like, we've all experienced that phenomenon where you're laying in bed and you suddenly like, and you
Yeah.
remember some horrible thing and some embarrassing moment. Like, you're like, oh, I guess that was meaningful to me. I guess that was way more meaningful to me that's haunting me way after the fact, sort of thing. We never know what memories are going to stick. The other big aspect about the memory stuff that I love that you do is the idea of these memories being constructed. Like, you really like that was really the idea in Necronautilus, is that you didn't have the memories, right? And so they would be
Yeah.
created in play. And from what we understand in modern memory theory is that when we remember things, we are building the memory. We reconstruct memories every time we remember things, rather than like going and finding the file on the bookcase. It's you have a blueprint and you build the memory, which means inevitably something's going to get built out of place. You're going to put a brick in the
Yes.
wrong spot or something like that, and so your memories will be these imperfect things that you keep rebuilding. And like, it just is so perfectly nailed in Necronautilus, and it sounds like it's going to be something that's really captured in Soulburner. Of like, these are the memories, but it's your interpretation of the memory, and it's how you're building the memory in that moment. As like, how does this memory inform what I need to know or think about right now? Like, I'm the psychologist nerd in me is just like, yes, this is the coolest thing in the world.
There's something in Necronautilus too, like when you succeed on a roll, you incur a memory based on what you just did, right? So, if you summoned lightning and you torch this metal vulture or whatever, then the GM prompts you like, oh, what memory comes back? And it's
Mm,
like, oh, I was in a thunderstorm as a kid and I was scared and like I saw this lightning split the tree or whatever. Like, I don't know, you improvise something, you make up something, because I think that's often how memory works for me is like the repeated instance is
mm,
what triggers the recollection.
right.
And that's a big thing in Soulburner too. And similar to in both games, again, you start off with like something that's very core to yourself. Um, in Necronautilus, it was the reason that you joined the Death Agency. That was your one profound memory that you start the game with.
Mm,
And in Soulburner, it was like your last glimpse as you were being burned alive.
mm,
So, and again, those are open to interpretation and exploration as through the game. I think a lot about the movie Memento too, like
mm.
because it's told in that interesting way that keeps pushing the curtain back a little bit further, and you keep learning new information and context. Um, that's the intent with Soulburner of like you might see your husband as the last thing that you see when you're burned alive, and so you as a player are like, oh, he must have burned me in my
Right.
bed, and then like you keep zooming back, you keep zooming back, you learn all these things. Like maybe he was there trying to save you as
Mm-hmm.
your house burned down by like something else, and like you're filling in that as you play. And I think that's really cool and fun and narrative because it does away with the write an essay about who you were before we start playing.
Yes.
And instead, it becomes a thing that everyone gets to explore in real time during the game. There's nothing left on the table because everything happens at the table. And that's what I think is a unique experience because I've played those fantasy games with my backstory written in my journal, and the other players do too. And I don't ever read those or know the full context of those. Um, and in a game where they're happening as part of the game, not only do we get to completely explore them, but they get to change around our experience.
Mm,
They're not as concrete as they might be in that sort of like narrative essay form.
yeah. This rocks. This rocks so much.
And
Yeah, go
that
ahead.
stuff all rules, but also if your head is just a double-sided axe, that's also really cool.
That's
So like
still pretty cool.
I think that's really the other kind of pillar of my design is I want to put these themes in. I want to mechanize the themes and have that be imbued through the whole project. But I also want you to be just weird and have the most fun.
Hmm.
Because at the end of the day, I'm making games, we're playing games. So you can have those rich kind of introspective experiences
Yeah.
and the mechanics support it. But if you just want to be crazy, the game supports that too. And I really like that. And I want to support all these different styles of play. And people, I think people get that,
Yeah.
which is, um, to me, a affirmation of what I want to do. Like to hear people talk about like, how interesting and significant the memory stuff is feels amazing. But so does when I played with my dad and he like summoned a volcano of blood to take down a spaceship.
Hell
And like
yeah.
that's, that's amazing. That's incredible. I think about that often. And those exist in the same game. Those are
Yeah.
the same game.
That rocks. That's super cool. So I
Yeah.
mean, so Soulburner is, I mean, it's its own thing, right?
Yeah.
It's using sort of like exactly like you said, it's this blender of Necronautilus and Morkborg and Cronenberg. But like, is it something that could I take my like Soulburner character and play it in Morkborg? Like if I was a really hardcore Morkborg person and I was like, I
Yeah.
saw Soulburner because it's giving me similar vibes, it's using like it's is that something that I could transfer over or?
Yeah. It's actually really easy. You would just kind of need the GM to like give the thumbs up. But so effectively Soulburner, like in Necronautilus, every character is the same class. You're this blank slate that
Mhm.
builds upon it through play. But it would not be different or challenging at all to just play the Ashen Corpse as a character class in your Morkborg campaign.
Hell
The
yeah.
main difference is instead of skill checks, because you don't have strength and agility and whatever, you have this part of you and this part of you, and these they're called reminders.
Mm,
They're the physical manifestations of these memories that you have. You use those as your skill checks instead of the traditional force stats.
cool.
So, and they fluctuate. They have the D20 plus X resolution. That all still tracks. The other main distinction, I think, in terms of playing both of them at the same time would be that Soulburner characters don't die,
Mm.
in the same way that Necronautilus characters don't die because they're already dead. Um, Instead, your body changes again. You lose some. I think the HP in Soulburner is called fire or fuel, and it's basically like the measure of vitality again.
Mm.
And when you are depleted, like some part of you is lost. So you can come back and you can generate new parts, and it's more forgiving in
Yeah.
that way than Morkborg is. Um, but yeah, you could very easily play them together. And the other intent being like you can use the wealth of Morkborg adventures
That's
in
what I was
Soulbringer.
thinking. Because there's so
Yeah,
much cool Morkborg stuff out there. And like if I could just have my soul burner people just run around in that giant playground
yeah,
of stuff that people have made, that would
yeah.
rock.
The intent there was like a lot of Morkborg adventures are built around a really interesting threat, usually in the form of a monster,
Mm.
or a really interesting item. And so combat and monsters and stuff works the same in Soulburner, so you could easily still do combat, but then you're going to take some part of that creature battle with you physically.
Right.
And then same thing with the item. Like you can do item recovery missions and stuff and find this magic mace. And instead of just delivering it to whomever, now have like flailed spikes all over you
Right.
because this is such a significant like checkpoint in your afterlife experience.
I'm now even imagining like a soul burner campaign that takes place in the Morkboard universe where instead of like slaying monsters and finding items and stuff, like you are just trying you know the like the end of the world is coming and you are trying to absorb as much of the world into your ashen beings as possible. And maybe that is something that can hold off the apocalypse or I don't know, like you know that you carry that stuff on. I don't know. But now I'm imagining like
Right.
finding cool ways to weave those things together.
Like the world is dying, but you are beyond death.
Right.
So like,
So
yeah.
so whatever you grab, whatever you hold on to, the malice of the ogre, the important items, that's what will remain of the Morkborgian world as it is
Right.
burned to the ground and it grows back from the ashes and
You
you are there.
become this like undead museum of the past.
Yeah, you're like the seeds of the next world. Like you plant your ashen bodies into the world and inform the next version of it based off of what you have held on to.
Yeah. The setting for Soulburner is this country called Cotter that is, volcanoes and deserts and like bringing in a lot of this arid climate and
Mm,
fire sort of themes to it. But it could very easily just be a region in the Morkborg map. It could be an island that's
yeah.
off the map or whatever. Like they're they're intended to be adjacent. And I think too the art and the language and stuff obviously is meant to obviously evoke Morkborg and bring that aesthetic with my own kind of twist. And
Mm-hmm.
I have an artist working with me. His name's or their name's Matt Oberski
Mm,
from Grand Rapids. So we could hang out in real life and talk about this game and
hell
get
yeah.
inspired. And that is a very cool, unique experience. But um, they're doing such an excellent job too, and we're just like feeding off of each other and making this thing. So, and I think this is the success of a lot of third party stuff
Mm,
is it evokes the thing that you want. It evokes Morkborg, but it is our twist on it, our stuff. And like, we love body horror. We love horror in general.
mm.
There's all these really cool real textures of like we're setting stuff on fire and taking pictures of it. And um it's it's ours. It's our
Yeah.
interpretation and regurgitation of this, both just the aesthetic, the mechanics, like all of the stuff that makes a game through our lenses and then put back out becomes something else.
Yeah.
And that's also a much wider topic that is like artistry as curation. And
Mm,
you're excellent at this too. Like um destiny means something to you.
mm.
It goes through your understanding of what games are and how games should work and what they feel like. And then you put out something like Light that is bespoke, but clearly inspired by. And
Mm.
I think that is on some level, what all of us are doing, not just as game designers, but as artists, is taking in all the things we care about, running them through the filter that is our understanding of reality or play or whatever, and then putting it back out and having a new thing exist. Um, and that to me is like a profound experience. Like that is the sort of nature of creativity. Um, which that was a very long-winded and weird way to say. Yeah, you can play Soul Burner with more work.
I mean I mean, number one, awesome, cool, very awesome. But yeah, I mean that is super. I love that idea that you have there at the end of how we, we are constantly absorbing the world around us, and we are interpreting it through our own lens, a lens that, harkening back to the beginning of our conversation, we cannot see and understand each other's filters and lenses. We don't know what's
Yeah,
going on in another person's mind, not just in thoughts, but literally how they picture things in the world, right? So, like,
yeah.
yeah, everybody's interpretation of the thing will be cool in their own weird new way. And I love that. I had honestly not thought about it like that way. And it's a very cool way to think about things.
I think sometimes artists in general, and again, we're focusing our conversation on game design and publishing, but
Mm,
that is art, and it's not terribly distinct from the process I go through in writing songs or drawing paintings or whatever. But because I like songs, I like paintings, I have some understanding of what they look like, what they can look like, what I do and don't like. Again, we go back to the, like, Mortborg, Necronautilus, and Cronenberg in a blender. I am the blender. And even Matto, my artist, is a different blender
mm,
who can take those same component pieces and make a different smoothie out of the same ingredients.
right.
And that's a lot of artists think, their goal is to create something unique, or their goal. Every once in a while, I'll see people who are like making a game that's based on a genre or something, but they're avoiding intaking the genre because they don't want it to be,
Mm,
skewed by that experience.
right.
But you already have, like, you've not gone your whole life. I didn't make I'm not a big cyberpunk person in terms of role playing games, but I get what they do. I have read a lot of them, and I've also obviously seen a lot of the movies and stuff that inspired that. Um, so my take is just going to be different, but because it's going through my lens, my experience, and um, I think it's good. I think people would benefit from that admission that, like, we are artists, are curators, and artistry is curation,
Mm,
instead of this idea that, like, originality is the thing that we're all seeking, or some sort of, like, because I don't think that's even possible. I think that's like a sort of myth or cultural thing that's put on you, is like,
yeah.
this is derivative of X. It's like, yeah, everything is derivative, and that's the whole point, because we are living beings who experience life.
Right.
Uh, and I think that's good. And I think that's, people benefit from, I certainly benefit from that admission and from that awareness,
Hmm.
because I want to take the things I care about and display why I care about them
Yeah.
through my own work. Um, and I think too, a lot of us do that in the inverse. Like, you know, there's a reason most of us are not using 5e as our system,
Mm.
because most of us don't like it. And that is in itself curation, is
Right.
excluding the things we don't like and including the things we do like, to make something new, even though that new thing is innately derivative of old prior things that exist.
Yeah.
That doesn't make it diminutive or bad or anything like that. I think that's education. Like,
Yeah.
that's information, and that's super good to consider and be aware of. You
Yeah.
want to eat everything. You want to taste every flavor, because that will help you as an artist know the flavors you do and don't like that you want to use.
Yeah. I'm having this weird like the sudden connection with what you're saying about how artists try and shy away with what has been done before to create their own thing. I'm seeing this interesting parallel in you're talking about that with how I talk to my students about the scientific process. So I teach research classes in psychology, and every student wants to come up with like their own brilliant, unique experiment that nobody in psychology has ever done before. And I'm like,
Yeah.
you're not gonna, you're probably not gonna do that. That's incredibly hard. But not only should you not like not don't do that because it's hard. You shouldn't do that because that's not how we do science. Science is an
Right.
iterative process by which we go through a cycle of building, and like we build based off of what we have seen before. Like it is an encouragement of exactly like you're saying, eating all the flavors, tasting all the theories out there, and then building the thing that is yours based off of that. It's a weird thing where it's a skill that I'm trying to teach my young scientists in my classrooms, and at the same time you're saying we need to kind of teach or encourage our artists to be thinking in a similar sort of way.
Yeah. It's funny because I think there's a lot of parallels. The other thing that I think comes up in that conversation is that that's like left brain, right brain division that doesn't really exist.
Right.
This idea that science and mathematics are distinct from uh
Creativity and art.
artistry and creativity. That's not true. It's never been true. But you see the mirrors here. You see the things that are common between them. Um, in this example, but also like obviously our games, which are creative writing, which are narrative. They have statistics. They have math. You consider those statistics when you create systems, and those systems are mechanized themes, which are these, air quotes, artist or created means by which you tell the story, but they're informed by mathematics. They're informed by the probability. And yeah, I think at least in my experience, that teaching or that cultural understanding that those are separate things is wrong, and it does you a wealth to ignore that or to disregard that, because I see so much in common with those things that it interests me and makes me a better artist to engage with those mathematical systems and those different kind of things that are generally considered not creative. It's really fascinatingly creative almost as soon as you get out of the classroom, because we're taught in like high school and stuff, like maths that like calculus. I took a lot of calculus, and I have seemingly never used it or have really any understanding of it. But like there there are shared components of, I guess, what technical knowledge and creative knowledge, and both they help one another. My engagement of math makes me a better game designer, makes me a better artist. Thinking of, like taking geometry, and now I paint. Like, and you probably don't think of those two things as shared or anything, like, because again, you're taught that you're either this person or that person.
Right.
That line is way, way blurry, and those things benefit each other.
Yeah.
So in the same idea of like this desire to be original and bespoke being sort of a myth, so is the idea that you are just one thing.
Yeah.
Even like again, going back to ether operations, like the visual informs the mechanical, informs the narrative. Like all of these things are in the same pool, and none of them would have succeeded without the others.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's really interesting. I enjoy talking to you about this like brain level stuff, because I dropped out of college 15 years ago, and so it's not really things. There are thoughts that are in here that I don't necessarily engage with, and almost every time we meet up or talk, it's like, how do brains work?
We always talk about it every time. I was thinking the
Because it
exact
does,
same thing.
yeah, it does interest me so much and inform so much of what I do as an artist, but it's kind of passive to me in my everyday work. And just knowing that you have that knowledge base lets me explore it in a more critical way. And I think that's not just beneficial for me and hopefully you, but like also hopefully the audience who's
Yeah.
engaging and hearing these thoughts. But yeah, it just makes me inspired because like I was going to work after this. I was going to go back into layout for cyber metal, and I still might. But like I'm very invigorated by that, just these theories, right? Like
Mm,
part of the cyber metal layout is me taking like fashion magazines and like figuring out proportions and
yeah.
the geographical dissection of aesthetic, and
Mm.
then putting it through me and putting it into InDesign. Um, and instead of that feeling tacky or lazy, now I'm like, that is creativity. Like that is
That is cool. That is awesome.
emboldening to me.
Yeah. I was literally thinking the same thing. I was like, I love sitting down and talking with Adam because we inevitably are going to talk like it's just going to happen. Some weird brain thing is going to come up,
Yeah.
and it's awesome. Just because, again, every time I read your stuff, I'm like, like Adam just I don't know if he gets it, if he's is he thinking about these things the way that I'm thinking about them. Like it's awesome. I absolutely love it. So hopefully other folks are finding this
Yeah.
because I again like it's the kind of thing that I could sit down. I teach whole classes about these things, so I could sit down and be like, all right, Adam, let's really get into this memory
Yeah.
stuff. um
I think what's cool too is a lot of your perspective. Again, we're us as curators, these living walking blenders. Um, yours comes from a more educational and more knowledge based perspective, and a lot of mine simply comes from wonder. Like
mm,
I wonder why I remember spilling these M&Ms in second grade. Like you probably on some level could answer that in a like clinical
right.
way, and I can't because my perspective is through art. And so the way that I explore that is through wonder and asking questions. And I think that's really cool. And I think that's why I enjoy so much these conversations, because we both have our own understanding of it that comes from our own lived experience.
Right.
But there's commonality to those things. And again, it is the blurring of the line between the left and right brain, is that we can find that middle ground and that commonality in admitting that this is just interesting,
Yeah.
even if we don't have answers. Like both of us are like, wow, that is really interesting.
Yeah. That rocks. I'm so into it. This
Yeah.
rocks. Um so Soul Burner, it's up on Kickstarter right now, right? Like folks, if
Yes.
folks have been listening to this and they're like, I want to be a weird ashen body that goes into the world and has a double-sided axe for a head, but also my loved ones as my right arm, like how do
Yeah.
like remind us again, what's the fun domain that you have for?
It's dying.day.
Yeah, hell yeah. That's such a good.
Uh, the book is $27. Soft cover, half letter, the type.
Yeah.
Um, and it's going to be great. And it's a standalone game. You don't need Morkborg or Necronautilus to play it. Having either or both of those books will help,
Mm,
like just kind of in a creative way. And you can add Necronautilus to your pledge through dying.day. But it is a standalone experience. So no not prior knowledge or experience is necessary to play it.
that rocks. I haven't looked at the page in a little bit, so I'm pulling it up here. Because you mentioned with Cyber Metal, you got a ton of merch. Are you going merch
No,
wild
I
here, or is this
didn't
going to
really
be a much more straightforward
it's much
campaign
more
for you?
straightforward because I'm still doing cyber metal. Like I said, cyber metal's in layout now.
Right.
I'm still doing like shirts and sticker packs, and we have temporary tattoos and stuff and then there's the full art book for cyber metal. There's
Right.
the tattoo book. So I have my work cut out for me there.
So much to do.
So with Soulburner, I was just like, it's a book. There are no stretch goals. It's the book. And but the one thing that really irked me,
Mm.
and I'll spill it here. Uh, it would have just messed with my shipping cost because I'm using media mail and this is not media. But I was going to make matchbooks that came with either a creature or a like really tiny point crawl on the inside of the matchbook, and then you could light it on fire. And
God
it really
damn
pained
it.
to have the idea and not pursue it, because as we were talking about earlier, I just kick out every idea, and I
Yeah.
and I love exploring them. To have that, to gamify a matchbook and then leave it in my brain and just be like, no, I won't do that. Oh, it hurts.
You must be just writhing in mental agony right now. I mean, because
Especially,
you've done like
yeah,
you've gamified the mask,
yeah,
you brought scratchers to the table. A matchbook is so freaking
yeah.
cool as an idea.
Oh, it really hurts. It's just a really high minimum quantity that I
Oh,
can't justify doing it without the Kickstarter. But knowing that part of the appeal of doing a quick and easy campaign is using cheap shipping
right,
options, I was like, oh, I just kind of have to, for my own sanity, because I also know again cyber metal fulfillment is going to be a headache for me.
right.
I just have to be straight up and leave this one. So maybe in the future I'll be able to make a little game matchbook that you can use the fire or something,
Yeah.
but it's not this one.
That's good like con loot for
Oh
like a
yeah,
convention. You got matchbooks on the table that are
yeah.
part of your bad you have the soul burner like banner in the background and you're giving away matchbooks. People are like, okay, yeah, I wanted to figure out what's going on over here.
Right.
That's pretty cool.
uh, yeah. There's also the rule in Morkborg that's like once the world ends, you burn the book,
Right.
and that was part of the inspiration of Soulburner 2 to be like, once I've burned my Morkborg, like what is there? And the answer is Soulburner. Like it's continuing that journey in ash and fire,
Yeah.
and like I think that was a major inspiration. But yeah, I really wanted you to give you the means to light the fire.
Yeah. I want to make something that is like this undead
Obscene.
museum thing that was mentioned. Like Will mentioned it in the chat. Just like the idea of the undead museum that the soul burner characters can be of the world before it burns. Like making something for that. Making that's very cool as like an
Yeah, that sounds
adventure.
awesome.
But I don't know. I have a wedding to plan, so I don't know if I can do that anytime
Right.
soon.
Yeah, our plates are very full.
Yeah. Um, well, this is rocked. I've had so much fun, Adam. Is there anything
Me too.
that we didn't cover that you really wanted to shout out or anything?
I don't think so. It felt pretty comprehensive. And
Hell yeah.
every part of my brain got used in this
Perfect.
conversation.
That's then we've mission accomplished.
Yeah,
Remind folks at home then like all the cool stuff. I'll make sure that the links are in the VODs for all of this stuff, but like where do you want
cool.
to point people?
Yeah. Soulburner is on Kickstarter right now at dying.day. And it's a relatively short campaign too. So if you're like on the fence, you should check it out. It's like less than 2 weeks left now. Cyber Metal 2012 is still available for pre-order along with all the wild merch that comes with it at pentagram.city. And the rest of my games are at worldchamp.io, including Babes in the Wood, which is a game I'm very proud of. Necronautilus, which we talked a lot about today in hardcover. I just did a reprint, so I have my living room is very full of those.
Sick.
If you're watching live, you can get 15% off at my store with the code AV birthday because it was my birthday this week.
Hell yeah.
Um, so that actually ends at like midnight tonight. So get some stuff on sale, and there's a bunch of weird form factor stuff. Like Spencer was saying, I have a game face mask. I have posters that are games and scratch off tickets, and
Just
that's my
constantly changing the game in terms of
that's my
how.
thing. I
Yeah.
love doing just different form factors and exploring what it can be and what function like again like what the form informs the mechanics of the
Yeah.
setting and stuff. And then I'm on Patreon doing games almost every month at patreon.com/worldchampgameco. And you can tweet at me at WC Gameco if you want to know any more about any of the wealth of things I have mentioned today.
Like we said, a lot of plates that are being spun and
Yeah.
they all rock. They're all on fire, but they're supposed to be on fire. That's a good thing for these
Yeah.
plates.
And someday maybe I'll give you some matches and you can light them all on fire.
Yes. Yes, I love that. Well, folks, thank you all so much for coming and hanging out with us on Coffee Break this week. We'll be back next week. I always forget to do this. I always forget to look up the guest before this. And then let me just vamp for a second. It's Raph. Raph D'Amico is going to be
Oh,
here.
very
We're
cool.
going to talk about the zone.
The
Raph,
zone is the best.
it's super cool. And Raph is a big psych person. So if you
Yeah.
enjoyed the psych stuff, there's going to be a lot of it next week. So thank you all so much. Have a wonderful rest of your day, morning, afternoon, evening, wherever it is you are. And we'll talk to you later. Bye.